buried my dog last month, I think. There was so little left of him, and his once golden rich coat was so faded and sallow that this empty, sickly canine corpse hardly seemed to be the same cheerful, energetic good boy who had run after the neighborhood cars so quickly, who retrieved that red squishy ball so playfully, and who had served so loyally as a companion in the park when I needed to display his inherent cuteness to act as my chick magnet. Loki, I called him, simply because his pointy little ears evoked the classic helmet of the Marvel incarnation, and he always seemed to have a knowing grin fitting of the god of mischief. It was not a name selected, I must emphasize, with any idea of the hell his death would send me to, or that from his depth I would be tormented by my own personal Jormungandr. I awoke that morning with an odd, undefined sense of dread. It was the sound of silence that stirred me out of gray, troubling dreams. There was none of Loki's jubilant early morning barking, nor his hungry scratching at my door, and the pitter-patter of his padded paws could not be heard. I sensed intuitively that something was wrong. There was a draft in the house, and I came down to find the front door open. I cursed in incredulity. I always locked up, but somehow the door was open and the dog got out. Imagine my shock when I stepped onto the front lawn looking for my missing dog and found that emaciated, discolored corpse waiting for me. My throat sunk into my intestines as I looked at that dead lump of sickly flesh that had once been my best friend. I turned pale in shock. My skin felt tight and cold, and my jaw gaped open. I didn't even notice I was standing barefoot in his last shit. I was not only shocked, but puzzled as well. The boy hadn't been sick. There was no visible injury. How had it happened? What killed him? My cousin Ivor is a veterinarian. I was saddened by my dog's death and perturbed by the mystery of it. A rational mind might tell me there was nothing supernatural or uncannily strange about it. An undetected brain tumor, or maybe he ate something he shouldn't have. Ivor empathized and offered an autopsy to assuage my curiosity, if nothing else. Using a shovel, albeit gently, to pick up my friend and put him in a black garbage bag felt so inglorious and disrespectful. Driving to my cousin's clinic, I felt that no explanation would be sufficient. No combination of words and condolences would replace the gap in my life and the hole in my heart. The autopsy took a couple of hours. Ivor told me the results would take a few weeks and looked perturbed by what he had seen already. I didn't ask him any questions, and he handed me my best friend in a small unmarked box. I buried him in the backyard and resigned myself to a life without Loki. People grieve differently, and I suppose we react differently to different kinds of deaths. When my mother killed herself, I lost all appetite, and the food I forced down my throat tasted of ashes. Yet in the days and weeks following Loki's passing, I found I was struck by a strange, insatiable hunger. I naturally assumed this was a coping mechanism, and wondered if I would return to normal, if I ever was, when I got the results of the autopsy. Closure is such an odd human concept, and I wonder if any of us ever truly find it. Not in this life. The strange thing was, as much as I ate, I couldn't seem to fully fill my belly, and I hungered still. My friends were shocked and concerned by my weight loss. They knew about my dog and would also assume I was growing thin out of grief. I didn't puzzle their minds and perturb them by my strange, nightmarish fancy that it wasn't just my mouth that demanded sustenance, that I had 1,000 appetites within me, all calling out for more, more, more. Something that could never be satisfied or even questioned. I started to eat things I never had before. I always found escargot disgusting, but now I was scarfing down plate after plate of snails, craving them in the middle of the night. Part of me even wanted to try them raw. I couldn't even taste the slimy squishiness. There was no pleasure in eating anymore. I just knew I had to have it. I actually lost weight. I spent my days inside with the curtains closed. I avoided the sun and often let the phone ring and ring until my friends left messages I deleted without listening. Sleep was slow in coming and filled with unsettling dreams I forgot by the time I fully regained consciousness. Sometimes I was awakened by nothing less than the rumbling of my own empty stomach, demanding that I go to the kitchen for a bowl of cottage cheese, week-old pizza from the freezer, that bruised apple that looked a day from spoiling, or yes, more of those awful snails. It didn't matter. Nothing tasted like anything, and nothing could fulfill me. My bowel movements were prolonged and painful. I would instantly flush because I didn't want to know if there was blood in my stool. My skin was pale and pasty. There were black rings under my eyes, and I didn't recognize the face in the mirror looking back. I think I was falling apart. I didn't want to go to a doctor. Nothing they could tell me would be any comfort, and there was no cure for whatever this was. There was something new in me, but what I initially thought of as a gape in my life didn't feel accurate. It had been filled unmistakably with something. The thought, a question as unanswerable as the hunger, kept me up at night. Had I caught it from Loki? Was it death? Was it something worse? In this life, there are questions we don't really want answered. I got mine last night, and I don't know if I will ever sleep again. I woke in pain, a terrible pain I had never felt before and could not define. I sat up and found blood on the sheets, a dripping red stain but no wound. To my horror, I realized it was coming out of the back of me. I gasped for air as the foulness of the situation I still didn't understand, not at all, washed over me. There was so much blood I felt weak and drained. I don't know if I had anything left in me for tears, so I just howled for how unfair, how painful, how senseless it all was. My dry, self-pitying sobs were broken only by the ringing of my phone by my bedside. It was Ivor, of course, pretty much the only number I would answer these days. He normally wouldn't call at such a godless hour, but he knew I was suffering, just waiting for an answer. If he knew that I was not only waiting to hear the results of my dog's autopsy, but afflicted with something indescribable myself, he would have spoken with more alarm and caution. If I knew what he had to tell me, I would not have picked up the phone. I know it's late, my cousin said tiredly, but I got the results. He paused with anticipation. Would you prefer I call back tomorrow and talk about it then? No, I snapped quickly, perhaps louder than I should. I took a breath and tried to calm. I'm sorry, I'd just like to know now, please. Yeah, he responded agreeably. He had no idea what I had been going through. He hadn't seen me since the day I dropped off my dog. It turns out Loki had parasites. Parasites? I swallowed as that ugly word rolled over my tongue and let it settle. You taken any trips to Indonesia recently? He asked with a more than intellectual curiosity. Indonesia? The question baffled and annoyed me. What was he on about? Tinea padoha, he announced. Indonesian tapeworm. I knew it was worms, but I had to send away to find out this deadly variety. Very rare. Almost extinct in the wild. He sounded unsettled. Apparently it's typically found only in the intestines of orangutans. Orangutans, I repeatedly dryly, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Nearly extinct. God knows how it got in your dog. So it's, I caught my breath as I tried to gather my thoughts. It's bad, right? Haven't been many studies, he admitted, but it does appear to be the kind of thing that drains the host, spreads from the intestine to parts unknown, reproduces internally, latches onto the digestive system, growing and growing while the body it's in shrinks and weakens. They even get into the brain, adjust the behavior so that the host eats what they want, stays until there's nothing left but a dry, empty husk. I felt a chill come over me. I could barely ask this next question, but I had to know. How? I took a moment. How do they spread? You have to eat the host or what? That's one way. Or you could step in the host's feces. That's where they lay their eggs. That was it then. I had forgotten all about that detail, which at the time I thought was just a gross little annoyance of a day of tragedy. I was more concerned with laying my dog to rest than washing my feet. Now I knew that one misstep I had blocked out of my memory as soon as I was clean had damned me. I dropped the phone without thanking my cousin or saying goodbye. I was so beyond such niceties now. I didn't even care that my screen cracked on the hard wooden floor. I didn't care about any of that anymore. I wanted to withdraw from this foul world. I wanted to be alone. But I wasn't. No sooner had the phone dropped than I was struck with a sharp, searing pain in my backside. It was like I was being torn apart. My insides were on fire. I ran to the restroom, even though I knew it was futile to try to drain this evil out of me. I sat there for hours, dry sobbing and hoping for some relief that wouldn't come. Then I heard it, a faint sound coming from within myself. It started with a strange hiss, like steam escaping. Then it started to talk. He's right, you know. came an uncanny, high-pitched voice I could only describe as inhuman. "We are inside you and we're not going anywhere. We like it in here, crawling around, eating what you eat, draining you from within, making our home here. It's not just your intestines, we're all over. We'll be in your brain soon. You won't be able to think for yourself. You'll just be a vessel. You will waste away while we grow stronger in legion." Then I felt a squiggling come out of me. I jumped up in shock and was more disgusted than I had ever been in my life when I looked in the mirror and saw the king worm, thin and slimy, poking out to taunt me. I will never forget its beady little eyes or sharp fangs as it grinned and told me, "So eat hearty," before withdrawing back into my bowels. I don't know how much time I have left. I don't care. My thoughts are getting hazy. All I do now in my last days is eat and eat, feeding those monsters inside me. It won't be long soon. When they crawl into my brain, I hope they make me okay with it. I am their slave, but maybe my horror will fade into complacency as I am eaten alive from within. They will leave me an empty shell like the last time I saw my dog, if it was even him anymore. Until then, I am in hell, where the worm does not die. Last month, I believe, I had to bury my dog. There was so little left of him, and his once vibrant golden coat had faded to a sickly hue. This lifeless, feeble canine body hardly resembled the cheerful, lively good boy who used to chase after cars in the neighborhood, fetch the red squishy ball with such enthusiasm, and serve as my chick magnet in the park, displaying his inherent cuteness. I named him Loki, partly due to his pointy ears resembling the helmet of the Marvel character and his mischievous grin. I want to stress that I never chose this name with any inkling of the torment his death would unleash, or the personal anguish that would haunt me from the depths of that loss. One morning I woke with an odd sense of dread. The silence around me brought me out of troubling dreams. There was no sign of Loki's usual barking or scratching at my door. The absence of his paws' pitter-patter raised an instinctual concern. I felt that something was amiss. A draft in the house led me downstairs, only to find the front door ajar. I couldn't believe it. I always secured it, yet somehow it was open and Loki had escaped. My shock deepened as I stepped onto the front lawn in search of my missing dog, only to find that emaciated, discolored body awaiting me. My heart sank as I gazed upon the lifeless form that had once been my faithful companion. Shock drained the color from my face, and I stood there, unknowingly, in his last mess. I was not just shocked, but also bewildered. He hadn't been unwell, and there were no visible injuries. How had this happened? What caused his death? My cousin Ivor is a veterinarian. Saddened by Loki's passing and troubled by the mystery surrounding it, I knew that rational thinking would dismiss any notions of the supernatural or eerie. Maybe an undetected brain tumor or accidental ingestion. Ivor offered to perform an autopsy to satisfy my curiosity, if nothing else. Gently using a shovel, I placed my friend into a black garbage bag, feeling it was undignified and disrespectful. Driving to my cousin's clinic, I realized that no explanation would fill the void or heal the pain in my heart. The autopsy took hours. Ivor explained that it would take weeks for the results, but his expression showed that he was disturbed by his preliminary findings. I didn't press for details and received my friend's remains in a plain box. I buried him in the backyard, accepting the reality of a life without Loki. People have different ways of grieving, and we react diversely to different types of loss. When my mother took her own life, I lost my appetite, and every bite felt tasteless. However, in the days following Loki's death, an insatiable hunger gripped me. I attributed it to a coping mechanism, wondering if life would return to normal, whatever that meant, once I had answers from the autopsy. Closure felt like an elusive concept, one I doubted any of us truly find. Strangely, despite consuming more than usual, I couldn't satisfy my hunger. Friends expressed concern over my weight loss, assuming it was due to grief. I didn't share my unsettling notion that it wasn't just food my body craved. There was an unrelenting hunger within me, insatiable and insistent, something that couldn't be placated or understood. I began eating foods I'd never considered before. Even though I'd always found escargot repulsive, I found myself devouring plate after plate, often in the middle of the night. I contemplated eating them raw. Taste had become irrelevant. The compulsion was all-consuming. My weight continued to drop. I secluded myself indoors, avoiding sunlight and ignoring ringing phones. Sleep became elusive, plagued by forgettable nightmares. Sometimes the growling of my empty stomach woke me, demanding sustenance: cottage cheese, freezer-burnt pizza, an aging apple, and yes, those revolting snails. I felt compelled to consume, although nothing brought satisfaction. My digestive system struggled, and my physical appearance deteriorated. I felt like I was unraveling. Visiting a doctor wasn't appealing. No medical diagnosis could comfort me. A new presence had invaded me, filling the void I had initially perceived. My life was no longer a gap, but a receptacle for something. This thought, as unanswerable as my unquenchable hunger, haunted me at night. Had Loki transmitted it to me? Was it a form of death? Something even more sinister? There are questions we dread the answers to. I received mine last night, and I wonder if sleep will ever find me again. I awoke in excruciating pain, a sensation entirely foreign. As I sat up, I noticed bloodstains on the sheets with no apparent source of injury. Horror washed over me as I realized the blood came from within me. Gasping for air, I struggled to comprehend the inexplicable situation. The pain was relentless, and I felt weak and drained. I didn't have tears left. All I could do was emit a sound of pain and frustration. My phone rang by my bedside, breaking my dry sobs. It was Ivor, the only person I would respond to nowadays. He must have sensed my torment, aware that I awaited answers. If he had known about the mysterious affliction alongside my curiosity about Loki's autopsy results, his tone would have been more alarmed. And if I had known what he was about to tell me, I might have never answered the call. "I know it's late," my cousin's tired voice began, "but I have the results." He paused, waiting for my response. "Would you prefer to discuss this tomorrow?" "No," I responded abruptly, perhaps too loudly. After taking a breath, I continued more composedly. "I'd like to know now, please." "Sure," he acquiesced. Unaware of my ordeal, he hadn't seen me since the day I brought Loki to him. It turns out Loki had parasites. "Parasites?" I repeated, the word tasting unpleasant as it left my lips. "Ever been to Indonesia recently?" Ivor asked, his curiosity more than intellectual. "Indonesia?" I was baffled and annoyed by the question. What did he mean? "Tinea padoha," he stated. "Indonesian tapeworm." I suspected worms, but I had to send samples to identify this particular deadly strain. It's quite rare, almost extinct in the wild. His voice sounded unsettled. "Typically, it's found only in orangutan intestines." "Orangutans," I echoed, rubbing my temples. "Nearly extinct. It's baffling how your dog got it." So, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "This is bad, right?" "There haven't been many studies," he admitted, "but it appears to be a parasitic infestation that drains the host's energy. It spreads from the intestines to other parts of the body, reproduces internally, attaching to the digestive system. As it grows, the host weakens and wastes away. It can even affect the brain, altering behavior to serve the parasite's needs. The host becomes a husk, devoid of life." A shiver ran down my spine. I mustered the courage to ask the next question, no matter how repulsive. "How does it spread? Do you have to eat the host or something?" "That's one way. Another is through contact with the host's feces. The parasites lay their eggs there." That was it, the missing piece I had forgotten about. At the time, I regarded it as a minor inconvenience on a day filled with tragedy. My focus was on laying Loki to rest, not on cleaning my feet. Now I understood that a single oversight had sealed my fate. I dropped the phone without expressing gratitude or saying goodbye. Such courtesies felt irrelevant now. I didn't care that the screen cracked upon impact with the hardwood floor. I didn't care about anything anymore. I yearned to detach from this wretched world, to be alone. But I wasn't alone. No sooner had the phone fallen than a sharp, searing pain tore through me. It felt as though I was being ripped apart from the inside. The agony was unbearable. I rushed to the bathroom, although I knew there was no escaping this malevolent force. For hours I sat there, dry sobbing, desperate for relief that never arrived. Then I heard it, a faint sound originating from within me. It began with a strange hiss like steam escaping. Then it started to speak. "He's right, you know," came an otherworldly, high-pitched voice that could only be described as unnatural. We are within you, and we're here to stay. We relish crawling through you, feasting on what you eat, draining you from the inside. We've made our home here. It's not just your intestines, we're everywhere. Soon we'll be in your brain, dictating your thoughts. You'll be nothing more than a vessel. You'll wither while we thrive and multiply. Then something squirmed out of me. I jumped in horror and repulsion, glancing in the mirror to witness a thin, slimy creature, the kingworm, protruding to mock me. Its beady eyes and sharp fangs were etched into my memory as it grinned, taunting me with its words, "So eat heartily," before retreating back into my bowels. I don't know how much time I have left, but I don't care. My thoughts are becoming muddled. All I do in these final days is consume, feeding the monsters within me. The end is near. When they infiltrate my brain, I hope they erase my horror, leaving only acceptance as I'm devoured from the inside out. I will become an empty vessel, much like the last time I saw Loki, if it even was him anymore. Until then, I am trapped in a living hell, where the worm does not die.